Father over Culture, you're welcome indeed to another edition of the programme where we've something quite special for you this week. We're coming to you from the village of Belcarra, which is situated just a couple of kilometres from Castlebar. Now behind me here is a 19th century fully restored Eviction Cottage. This was the home of a family of 9, the Welches, and they were the last people to be evicted in this area. Today, as I said, it's fully restored due to the great work of the local community. It's a tourist attraction now, and this evening we're going to have a rambling house in it with music, song, dance and a little bit of history about the place. So sit back, relax and enjoy.
Welcome to Belcarra, young man.
Thanks very much.
We considered this project as a result of a conversation we had with a neighbour here. He was anxious that this cottage should be restored to its original state.
Father McDermott at the time had photographs, and he was very interested indeed as well. So we had to go about getting a lease of the landowner, who was Paddy Heenan, the late Paddy. And that took some time to get all that through. It was a lease for 100 years, I think we got. Then, as Mary said, the FOSS scheme, under the leadership of Conor Heaney, took place then, and a number of people, different workmen came on board, and it took possibly
2 years in all. It took 2 years to build. It started in April 1997 and finished in March of 1999. So during that time we were researching the information about the Walsh family, and I'd like to pay tribute to Kathleen Heaney. She was the chairperson of the community co-op at the time, and she passed on shortly after that. But she was so committed to this project and went about the research, and was delighted that we considered having the reenactment of the eviction on the day of the opening, the grand opening in the year 2000. So we were very proud of that.
This cottage was the property of the Walsh family, and they were evicted from this house here on the 2nd of October 1886 because they had no money to pay the rent. One of the first houses evictions that was photographed, by Mr. Wynne from Castlebar. It's open to visitors whenever they call.
there we have the great opening there from the Belcarra set dancers doing the Dorada set. And it's great to see that 25 years later, they're still performing every week in the community centre in Belcarra. They have their set dance. And now I know there was a bit of a break, but I think they deserve a great round of applause during COVID. But so if you ever want a bit of set dance, the place to come is the community centre in Belcarra every Thursday evening. And I know a lot of people enjoy the set dance, and that was an amazing opening for a rambling house here in the Eviction Cottage in Belcarra. Well, my first guest on the show this evening is a very distinguished lawyer, not just here but indeed abroad as well. He's a historian, has written many books. He's a best-selling author of books on Irish history, but particularly here in Mayo. Dr. Michael O'Connor, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thanks very much.
You've written extensively about Mayo and history of Mayo, and indeed about the land wars, which is what we're here today about, the evictions of that. So tell me about the land wars.
Yeah, so the land war in Mayo, and on this particular estate, the Belcarra estate, played out over a lengthy period. We're looking at the period from 1883 to 1910. And during that period, we see hundreds, if not thousands, of legal cases taken against tenants to evict them off the estate. We see hundreds, if not thousands, of evictions, bearing in mind that many of the houses had large numbers of children in them. So it wasn't just simply a question of evicting the tenant. The tenant had a wife, there may have been a grandmother, many children. This house had 10 children in it at one stage, in addition to Mr. and Mrs. Walsh. So we see all these evictions. We also see a systematic and deliberate levelling of houses. How many houses were levelled is anybody's guess, but it's certainly in the dozens. And perhaps the best example is the village of Tully, which is a very short distance from here, and was one of the epicentres of the land war. And in the village of Tully, the number of houses was reduced from 16 to 4. So that was a very significant change in that community.
So which brings us to the house here, the Walsh family. Why were they evicted?
So the Walsh family, when Gardner arrives in Belcarra, she has a problem. She's got this great estate, 23 townlands, but it has tenants, and she doesn't want tenants. But she has another difficulty. The rent has been reduced by her uncle, who was a more benevolent individual. And so this is the winter of 1883. She immediately reneges on the rent obligation reduction. Now, bear in mind, tenants had to pay rent. That was paid at the end of the year on these gale days when they sold livestock or whatever. But as we know, the economic conditions were declining. So Gardner sees this as an opportunity. So she immediately demands full rent from hundreds of tenants. The tenants either won't pay or in solidarity refuse to pay. And some offer less rent. But Gardner really wasn't interested in rent. So she then moves from 1883 into 84 and 85 and goes through this legal process using the courts in Castlebar, Ballyglass and Westport to basically have the tenants evicted. And to do that, she ultimately gets court orders, and then large numbers of constabulary leave Castlebar and Ballyglass, meet at French Hill, a few kilometres away, and they move in the direction of, firstly, Tully, and then they work their way sort of systematically through the townlands until they get to the house of James Welch and Margaret Devaney, who lived here. And they had not paid their rent. Interestingly, in the case of the Welshes, earlier they had been evicted, but the conditions in the house were so terrible, and that the family and children were so terrible, that the sheriff at the time, a man called Rutledge, took sympathy. And he said, look, you've got to leave the house, but I'll let you back in as a caretaker. And so that was a mechanism used to recategorize the tenants as something different, so that the landlord and tenant legislation, such that it existed, didn't apply to them. So he let them back in. But then we moved to October 1886, and something in the order of 70 members of the constabulary, an army of bailiffs, magistrates, etc., move in this direction. They evict 13 tenants and demolish houses in Tully, and then they come here. And they set about the process of evicting the Walsh family. And interestingly and importantly, that is the only one of the many evictions that was captured by the Wynne Exactly, the Wynne Collection photographer. So the images show large crowds gathered around the house, the constabulary are protecting Harriet Gardner and Susanna Pringle, and the bailiffs, and you see the furniture being taken through the door of the house, and ultimately the family are
on the roadside. And in fact, the locals came to the rescue and built a little chigging.
The chigging, which is just over there.
If you have an interest in Mayo history in particular, well, Dr. Michael O'Connor has a number of books, including this one, When the Crown and Bayonet Ruled. And there's lots more other books as well. I've got another one about the jails of Mayo as well, fascinating book. So if you'd like more, just look him up, Dr. Michael O'Connor, and there's an array of books there about the whole history of Mayo. So thanks very much for joining us on the programme. Thank you. Well, it's time for some more music now. We have a wonderful singer with us this evening, Maureen Cunningham, and she's going to sing a beautiful song called Gold and Silver Days, accompanied by Tomás Welch on the guitar, of course, Tomás of the famous Bros Welch band, who also hail from Belcarra as well. So a big bullabus for Maureen Cunningham.
As I'm sitting by the fireside and turning back the years, I can hear my mother singing in the morning as she scrubbed our shiny faces and then packed us off to school. All too soon those days are over without warning. Sing me the songs of our gold and silver days, days filled with innocence and light. Not a penny to our names, we were happy just the same in our gold and silver days.
Well, my next guest certainly has been involved in many of the projects that have sprung up here in Belcarra in the village over the last number of years. A well-known name here in the area, Sean Nestor, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Henry.
Lovely to have you. And you have a great history of the townland and the village of Belcarra as well that you've done over the years.
Yes, Belcarra, it's rich in archaeological remains and in historical events and so on. So it's from that point of view, it's a very interesting place indeed. Belcarra, as an area, has been home to some famous personages down the years, and I think I should mention, for instance, people like James Daly from Coachfield. He was the co-founder of the, yes, indeed, he owned the Connacht Telegraph and was the editor, and he was the co-founder of the Land League as well with Michael Davitt, yeah. And Henry Corrie, another man, he was a leader of the Fenians at a crucial time here. He was a local school teacher, and he was arrested by an Inspector Pepper, who arrived at his classroom one day during lessons and arrested him and took him off to Spike Island in Cork or wherever. So that was he was another famous man. Father John Bloich was the founder of the Maynooth Mission to China, and a very, very important man in the missionary efforts of his day. In fact, a brother of his, Joseph Bloich, was a minister he was the founder of the Clonathalwan party and leader of it, and also he was Minister of Lands in one of the coalition governments. So we have a lot of things to be proud of in Belcarra.
You've also twinned with a Belcarra in Canada as well, in Vancouver, is it?
It's close to Vancouver. There's a little Belcarra there. Yeah, indeed. One of the owners of a Mayo paper called the Mayo Constitution. His son, who was educated in Trinity College, he immigrated to Canada, where he became, I think, a magistrate out there as well. And he decided to call his local village out there Belcarra.
Sister Maureen, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege.
Well, from your experience now over the years, where do you see the future for villages like Belcarra, Island 80, Bath, places like that? Where do you see the future for them?
I do see it very much, and I see it in an initiative that we started some years ago as a consequence of discovering that this would be necessary, and we set up a rural community network. And the Rural Community Network, indeed Belcarra, is a very active member and gave great leadership, and the leaders, whom you've heard already speak to you, gave wonderful support. And we have 20 communities in a Rural Community Network known as the Toher Valley Rural Community Network. Toher coming from the ancient pilgrim path from Ballintubber to Crowpatrick. So we couldn't think of anything better than to link in with that tradition, that great culture.
On that note, you're happy enough anyway that the small villages will survive and small farms?
Well, if. I would hope, and I would encourage people to realise that living in rural Ireland, or wherever we live, that every single person in our rural communities has something to give back to their community. Can we unlock the potential? That's the question. And I believe we can.
How about that, ladies and gentlemen? Well said, Sister Mary. Well said. Well, my final guest, I suppose we spoke so much about the past and a difficult period in our history. And what about the future now and the young people that are living and making Belcarra their home? Well, my next guest, and final guest indeed, is Linda Cuff, who is married with 2 children here in the village. And so what's it like now for young people growing up in Belcarra and living in Belcarra now?
Well, first of all, I'm so happy that you're calling me young. And that's the best part. Well, I grew up in Belcarra, so I was born and reared here, and I got married to a local guy here. And I now, as you said, have 2 children here. And I have to say it's fantastic growing up, having grown up here and seeing my children grow up here. And I do think things have changed over the years. There's so much now for the children of Belcarra, literally from cradle. You know, they were baptised here in Belcarra Church. But beyond that, we have the playground, which was built recently. We have the sports field. We have a beautiful riverside walk, biodiversity trail. The community centre, I don't think there's a day that there isn't some activity going on there. We've piano lessons, we've music for babies and toddlers, we have Irish dancing, there's yoga and mindfulness for children. That definitely wasn't around in my day, but it's there now for the children. There's just everything that they could need to do is here for them, and it's lovely.
And Belcarra also won Pride of Place as well, didn't it?
It did, twice actually. So one in 2014 and again in 2020, which was during COVID. And I was involved with the committee that time myself, just to help out from a technical side, because everything changed. There was no meetings. The judges couldn't come and walk around like they had done previously. So everything was over Zoom. And we did a fabulous video of the village, and I think it showcased everything that's fabulous about Belcarra. So that's available online, but we were delighted. We all watched the prize giving online, we were all waiting patiently at computers, but it was great. And the
Tidy Towns played a big role in that as well, isn't it?
We have a very active Tidy Towns committee as well, and different to the past few years with COVID, the judges are coming around this year, so there's a huge push, and there's a great, I suppose, engagement with people in the village. They all come out. We've Monday evening tidy ups. People come out, they're picking up litter, even beyond just the village itself. So I would have grown up, as they called it, in one of the hinterlands in Clune the One. And recently there was a little project done on a statue there And I see the kids of that area go out litter picking regularly as well. Even though it's not part of the judging area, there's that pride in the community, and they want to keep it nice and keep it lovely to live.
Is it a growing village?
I definitely think so. And I suppose having, as I said, I was reared here and I used to know everybody. Definitely there's a lot of people have moved to the area now, and you might know everybody now that you meet in the car. My husband's probably different there in the garage there, and he knows every car that passes. He might know who's driving the car, but he knows every car. But yeah, there's a lot of development. We have a couple of new housing estates have come to the village. There's a new development just starting now, close to the school. And it's growing in more ways than that. Like they talked about all the facilities, the 2 pubs, the shop. I just feel when I was growing up, there mightn't have been everything that was needed in the village. But as I said, my kids don't need to travel to Castlebar for Irish dancing or for music lessons. You know, everything is on our doorstep here in Belcarra, and it's great. I think business has changed a lot as well over, like as you said, the garage is 60 years. They set up in 1962 with my husband's grandfather. He set up the business. So my father-in-law, my husband, and even James, who's 4, gets stuck in every so often in there. But I suppose the business has changed. An awful lot of stuff is going online, and social media is so important. But I think the most part of it is that loyalty and that customer base and shopping local. And I think that's huge for all small businesses.
Well, we've almost come to the end of the show, but first I'd like to thank all the guests we've had here, and indeed the people, the community here in Belcarra, for making us so welcome for this special Ramblin' House. We hope you at home enjoy the show as well, but we can't finish without a little bit of music, and we have some talented musicians here. From the area, I can tell you, we have Katie Heaney, and you're going to play the harp for us. Cian Kilkenny is playing the flute here, and they're going to play a jig for us. Will you give them a big bull of us?